in Zimbabwe.
Good morning. I'm not sure when there's an arrest warrant over your head, you're supposed to introduce yourself because then they might come for you. But if that risk isn't there, I'm called Timothy Kaligira and video producer and political commentator.
Thank you very much for the introductions. I've had a friend of mine I haven't seen in a while, Michael Woneka, good to see you. There's an aspiring MP, Zach, good to see you. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for having honored the invitation to come for this meeting, the pre-launch of a research, guns everywhere, the military and transition politics in Uganda. I want to thank all of those who have put their efforts to put together this study, Mr. Godbert Mushabe, Mr. Job Kija, Mr. Barnett Musasi, and Andrew Karamagi. And very shortly, I'm sure they will be taking us through the highlights of the research they have done. And after that, we're going to have a question and answer session where you'll engage them in questions. You put up your hand, I'll be able to give you the opportunity to ask, maybe add value to the research they have done or disagree with them entirely, if you can. That's normal, and it's called debate, so long as we disagree with the respect. May I, at this juncture, ladies and gentlemen, invite Mr. Job Kija, ED Idea, to come and give us the welcoming remarks. Job, let us welcome him with a round of applause.
Okay, thank you so much, Patrick. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Pistos. I didn't know that Bishop Zach was contesting to become an MP. I've just learned that from Patrick this morning. Please, Bishop, declare the constituency, and then we shall come and support you. You're most welcome, ladies and gentlemen. And good morning. Yes, my name is Job Kija. I work with the Innovations for Democratic Engagement and Action, which is IDEA in short. IDEA is a young people's democracy ideas incubation hub. I'm sure you're wondering, some of us have gray hair. Myself, Godba, Andrew has a bald head, but we work together. It's just because of the work that we do. We are a policy think tank and we are a big data center. Now, really, the way IDEA does its work is that we work with different partners to engage in what we call governance trends analysis. So we produce a lot of research work, and one of the things that we do is conducting trends analysis, but also engaging in scenario building. Now, I need to mention that in the build-up to the 2021 elections, we worked together with GLIS and a group of other experts to look at what the transition question looked like for Uganda. And of course, you know, Uganda has not had a peaceful transfer of power since we got independence. I think independence was the only peaceful transition that we had. Because, not so, it's contested. It's the only one that, it wasn't also peaceful. So we've never had a peaceful transition. Huh? We have. Okay, you tell us. But basically, so many of us have really been having a lot of anxiety of what will it look like to transition from the current regime to probably the next one, considering that all those that we've had in the past have actually been violent. So we worked with a team of experts to undertake scenario building, and we developed a paper, which I believe some of you have had a look at, but for those of you that have not yet looked at it, we should be able to share it today. And it's really looked at three major scenarios for Uganda. One was the crested crane scenario, the other was the storm in the teacup, and finally the warrior mad king scenario. Recently, last year, in the build-up again to the next elections, we said let us revisit these scenarios and see whether they still hold, or what will it look like for us, especially as we head to the next elections. And when we revisited that work, we actually realized that the prediction that we had made in that first paper was more or less the exact scenario that we're in, which was the warrior Mad King. Now, instead of again going into another series of scenario building, we developed a paper. We did some research work, which paper we are going to be sharing with you today. My colleague Godba will be able to take us through the highlights of the research. And so we have invited you here today to really just get a feel of what the research findings are. It's not a launch. Some people have been referring to it as a launch. It's just really a pre-launch sharing of the findings such that you can give us feedback, but also get a sense of what this paper looks like. So ladies and gentlemen, I wish to once again welcome you to this discussion and hope to listen to your insights today. Thank you.
The warrior Mad King scenario. That's likely to be quite something, isn't it? I can imagine there's a Mad King and he's a warrior and he's causing havoc. I can't wait to hear the highlights of such a study. Let's give Job another loud round of applause. And he talked about that our country has not had a peaceful transition of power. And Philip will contest that. So we'll also be looking forward to hear from Philip. The other, probably he could refresh our minds. But can we now, let us welcome in front here the Executive Director, Great Lakes Institute for Strategic Studies, Mr. Godba Tumushavi, to give us the highlights of this study.
Yes. Good morning, everybody. Thanks very much, Patrick, and thanks, Job, for those introductions. Very delighted to be here and to have all of you around. As Job indicated, essentially, this is a pre-launch of the work that we've been doing, and so I'm going to run you through some of the highlights of that study, so that we can be able to get your feedback, your input, as we conclude the final report. After lots of debate and changes, we decided to title this paper, Guns Everywhere, the Military and Transition Politics in Uganda. And again, as Patrick mentioned, it's a study done by 4 of us. We've spent the last about 7 months working on this study, going back into the history and trying to understand what is the position and what is the position of the military, or what is the potential impact of the military in a potential transition process in Uganda. So basically we have the way we have structured this paper. The presentation is I will talk about the motivation for the study. Job has already highlighted a bit of that, the methodology, and then the report itself. And the way we've done the report is really to take a historical approach and see, and be able to see at every point in our history, how does the military look like, how does it behave, how is it constituted, and what exactly is it. So as Job indicated, did I lose anything? Okay, I think it's back. Yeah, so in 2021, we published a study based on some work we are doing, we have a study group called Uganda Political Transition Scenarios Thought Leadership Group. We meet every other time and look at the changes in our politics, what is happening, the number of factors that could shape the transition process. So we've had all these conversations over the years, and a number of the members of the groups are in this room. But in 2021, we decided to synthesize the work that we had done into a paper called Uganda Political Transition Scenarios to 2026 and beyond. We are already looking at the idea that we would have elections in 2026. So we wanted to understand what would the situation look like as we move to 2026, and then the elections, and then after the elections. So we are trying to think and project the future, because that's what scenarios work does. Based on that work, we framed the 3 scenarios that could happen. First is what we call the flying crane scenario. The flying crane scenario is basically the scenario where, given our historical circumstances and the things that have happened, that we as a country will come together and sit on the same table and discuss the future and agree on how to move forward. So that is the flying crane. That the conditions are available for everybody to sit on the table, including those who do not like each other. Because at the end of the day, we don't have to like each other. We just belong to the same country. We are Ugandans, nothing that can change. That's a historical fact. The fact that we're Ugandans, you can't change it. So the idea was that we could sit on the same table and be able to talk about the future, and therefore that would signal a peaceful transition into the future. The second scenario is what we characterize as the storm in the teacup. The storm in the teacup is really a situation where things are changing, but they are not changing. The more things change, the more they remain the same. So you have the economy is not doing well, the insecurity is prevalent. You are looking for jobs, you can't find them. So you can find if you are looking for the good things, you can find them. If you are looking for the bad things, you can find them. And therefore, you are moving, but you are not moving. I call that, sometimes I call it developing in a circle. That around the circle, if you are developing in a circle, around the circle, you are making a lot of mileage. You are clocking a lot of mileage. But when you think of the distance you've moved, you actually haven't moved very far. So that's the storm in the teacup scenario. And then the last one is the warrior mad king. The warrior mad king scenario is the scenario where the incumbent president, Yoweri Museveni, we described this and said, his mental programming is that he's a life president. So in other words, no matter what you have you think about him, he wants to be president for life, and all the institutions of state are being configured to ensure that he's a life president. So that means that the only way, and going by history, all the leaders that have pursued the life presidency project, normally violence escalates. It keeps on escalating over time. And that is evident even in our politics here, that if you look at especially our elections, you realize that our elections have been becoming more violent over time until 2021, when we had to kill each other. And now people are already dying, including people dying in the NRM primaries. So you can see that the violence is likely to escalate because those are the conditions that we have. So having published this paper and we continued to have these discussions, then we said we need to look at some of the factors that define the warrior mad king scenario. And we could look at a number of them because we had looked at the young people, the position of young people in the political process. We're looking at the economy. The economy is going to be a major factor, how the economy shapes up. But we chose to look at the military because we think it's a very important factor in this process. So the way we approached this study was to look at the political transition theory. Transition theory. There's a lot of work that has been done on political transitions. Some of the major studies that were done by Woodrow Wilson Institute, based in the U.S., looking at Latin America and Europe. But actually, the interesting thing is that all the findings from those studies basically can easily be applied to Uganda with the differences in terms of context. So the first framework we looked at was the characteristics of a functional democratic state. Because basically, when you talk of transition, the understanding is that you are transitioning from a bad situation to a good situation. You are transitioning from authoritarianism to a democratic dispensation. So then the question was, what are the functional characteristics of a democratic state? The United Nations Development Program basically highlights 3 characteristics. One is presence, that the state is present in our lives, and it is able to provide the basic things that we need. Normally here in Uganda, it's called service delivery. People just call it service delivery. Sometimes you feel like if you ask people what is service delivery, you don't feel like actually people know what they are talking about. But it's a political jargon that we are delivering services. Some of you are politicians. The Gerards, if you go to campaign, say, I am going to provide services, probably without even knowing also what those services are. But those are politicians. The second one is safety and sustainability. A state is supposed to ensure our safety. That wherever we are able to, you are supposed to feel safe, and safety in terms of the environment and the conditions in which you live. The challenge that we've had in Uganda here, when we look at and the reason we titled our paper the guns everywhere, is that everybody, there is a mental programming that we've been programmed to think that safety and peace is determined by the number of guns around you. So in other words, if you move around and see people armed with guns, then you say we are secure. They say, recently I attended a function in Ntungamo there of an LC3 chairperson. But if you saw the guys, the number of army men and the police who were carrying guns at the function, you would expect that they were expecting an ADF attack. That's Ntungamo. Okay. But essentially, the interesting thing that every leader who would stand up to speak at the function would point to those armed people and say, now there is peace. So that's how we have been programmed to think now. And then the third functional characteristic is hope. That you are managing an economy that provide in a way that you provide hope for the people. The future always keeps bright. I think we believe that at this point, when you look at our conditions, we are at the point of hopelessness rather than hope. And that has implications on how a society is able to transition. So when you think of transition, there are basically 3 different forms of transition. One is reform. That's according to the literature. You can look at 3 forms. One is reform. Reform normally happens when the incumbent regime is the one that is managing the transition. So in other words, a regime like the Museveni's regime can get into a comfort zone and feel like we are in charge, and therefore they try to reform the system. Normally when that happens, there isn't a lot of margins that you gain, because the ruling political elite is the one which is reforming, and therefore they are more focused on protecting their interests. The second one is compromise. Compromise happens when the population is so organized and agitated that it is putting pressure on the incumbent regime, and the incumbent regime feels threatened, or especially the political elite within the regime feel threatened, and they realize that the only way they can secure their future and secure their interests is to be able to negotiate with the pro-democracy forces. And then the third one is the overthrow. That if there is no reform and the population is organized and agitated, but you can't achieve a compromise, there is pressure on the regime that eventually the citizens and the security forces actually could get an alliance and overthrow the incumbent regime. So these are the three types of reform that you will see. When either of these will lead into a transition, and basically either it's a military coup or power grab that involves a military coup or a civilian coup. A civilian coup can be a constitutional coup, an electoral coup. Then there is the hybrid, where there is a compromise, and then of course there are democratic elections in some cases. So these are the different forms of transition that happen. But our major focus really was to see, so in these transition mechanisms, where does the military fall? And for us to be able to do that, then we had to understand how do we understand Uganda's military? So what we did was to take a historical approach and go back to the pre-colonial period and see how has Uganda's military been organized over the years. This you may not be able to, I think it may not be legible enough. But essentially we've mapped out the military, starting with the kingdoms, because according to the historical accounts, Kabaka Mutesa and Kabarega actually had normally what we would call home guards. But as the colonialists came in, they then changed these home guards into a standing army. Originally, they were really guys who were attending to the parish. But as the colonialists came in, the fights between Buganda and Bunyoro intensified, and then they started training and equipping standing armies. But we know that in 1894, Uganda became a protectorate of Britain, and it was placed under the British East African Company, IBEA. Yeah, I'm sure even the young people who do, I don't know if they still do the history, where we study IBEA. But essentially, IBEA was had a contract to manage Uganda. So Uganda was a business of the British, managed by a company called IBEA. For the NRM people, I normally say that my understanding of NRM is like the contemporary version of IBEA. That you have a country, it's run as a business, and this company is meant to be able to ensure everybody is engaged in the production of goods, mainly products. So it's IBEA that introduced the first military in Uganda by bringing soldiers from Equatorial Province in Sudan. And so most of these soldiers who came to support the work of IBEA they were basically mercenaries comprised mainly of Nubians. So they are the ones who took over and started supporting IBEA in doing its work, including some of the historical cases that we'll see, the subjugation of Bunyoro, Buganda being able to attack Bunyoro and subjugate it, the time when Kabarega and Mwanga go to exile. This is still IBEA in operation. And so we've done that timeline to see how this has evolved over time until 1962, when that army was handed over to the post-independent government or the independence government. That army is handed over now as Uganda Army. So what was King's African Rifles is now called Uganda Army, and we basically start from there, from independence. So up to 1962, the Uganda Army is mainly the characteristics. Some of the characteristics are it recruited many as mercenary force, substantial involvement of foreigners, mostly Nubians. For most of the time, it's owned by IBEA. It's under the absolute command and control of the governor, and this is what is passed on at independence. So essentially, we inherit an army, and you'll see that this process actually continues over the years. So after independence, then we look at the military from 1962 to 1995. These are basically our timelines in terms of how we do this analysis. So what we see from independence is an army that deeply gets into the politics of the country. First of all, I should mention that as early as 1964, that's when we had some changes within the military. The Armed Forces Act of 1964 was like the most significant legislation after the Armed Forces Ordinance of 1957. So the Armed Forces Act of 1964 organizes the military into the Air Force and the Land Forces. In 1966, we have the army attack the Kabaka's palace, and therefore, and normally that is 1966 is a defining moment, because then it is defined as the moment when the army becomes a big question in our politics. Fast forward 1971, the army deposes deposes Obote and installs Idi Amin as the president. And essentially it's the army that is now in charge, running up to 1979. In 1979, as you well know, the Idi Amin's army, so that is Uganda army now, is overthrown by the Uganda National Liberation Army, UNLA. So for the first time, there is an opportunity for us to constitute a national army, because the former army has been completely disbanded. So if there were any understanding that we needed to create a national army, 1971 would have been one of those, 1979 would have been one of those moments. Because UNRA was mainly comprised of Tanzania People's Defense Forces and then elements within the Ugandan exile groups. But what happened in 1979 is that guys who were already focused on power, and in particular President Museveni and Oito Jok, realized they needed the armies to be able to have an influence on the power structure of the country. So both of them started recruiting their own armies. So by the time of the elections in 1980 December, Oito Jok had recruited 36,000 soldiers, and Museveni had recruited 24,000 soldiers. So basically, you have soldiers or armed people that are aligned or loyal to these individuals. So after the elections, and you know the elections, again, we have the military, it is still in charge, because that's the military council. The military council is the one which organizes the elections, and we know the stories around them, no matter the contestations, that the military council is the one that organizes elections and hands over power to Obote. So you can see that consistently, the army is able to hand over power to you and take it when they want it back. So that's basically what you see throughout the history. So in 1981, Oito Jok's group became the UNRA. Museveni's group transforms into a rebel group called NRA. I don't know, General, if you were already in that group. Not yet. But essentially, that's how the structure is moving as the military. So we have a 5-year war. One important anecdote there is that Oito Jok died in 1983 in a plane crash, in a helicopter crash. So because, and you can see that because the army that had been recruited was recruited by Oito Jok, once Oito Jok died, it was difficult for Obote to control the military. And therefore, the conflict started emerging, and eventually there were disagreements within the military, and Obote is overthrown by Tito Okello Lutwa, who is eventually overthrown by Museveni and the NRA. So That's 1986. So what do we have in 1986? In 1986, a rebel group captures power, captures state power, and declares itself the national army. In other words, in short, anybody can still talk about the people's army, because NRA likes describing itself as a people's army. But really, nobody determined how they were recruited. So someone sat down, worked out a project, recruited an army, went and fought and captured power and declared his group a national army. And sometimes these are hard facts that people do not want to talk about, because in this country, one of the things we found out in the research is that it is very, very sensitive to talk about UPDF or NRA and not call it a national army. Very, very sensitive. But those are the facts. Those are the facts, because this is someone's army. So legal notes number 1 of 1986, essentially, the NRA declared itself the national army, and then it formed the government, mainly led by its commander and the chairman of the NRM. So one of the things I would want to emphasize is the code of conduct of the National Resistance Army, because that's one of the instruments that really continuously has defined NRA during its operations. No matter the challenges, the NRA was known as a disciplined force. One of the things that we found is interesting is that where there was insurgency, in areas where there was conflict, actually NRA was as brutal as any other force. In areas where there was peace, you could definitely see a force that was very pro-people, very friendly, and it was fun being around them. But when you start looking at the conduct of the NRA in eastern Uganda, in northern Uganda, and now some of the cases we've seen in Kasesa and others, you realize that actually NRA is an army. It's like an army like any other. So the question of discipline is something that still has to be interrogated. Is the NRA disciplined because it's operating in a good environment? Under pressure, can it still maintain the same level of discipline that normally is attributed to it? So effectively, I would say that from colonialism up to 1995, you basically have military rule in Uganda. So in other words, because sometimes we tend to look at military rule when we are ruled by a military person, but actually all through, it is the military in charge, it is the gun in control. So that's the point up to 1995. So in 1995, we have our road junction. We are to determine whether we can move towards a democratic state, or whether we continue with on the same trajectory. So 1995 is the attempt to try to correct things and create a new dispensation on how the military can engage or can play a more proactive, a more positive role in the politics of the country. So the normative framework that is established in 1995 is under Chapter 12 of the Constitution. That's the one that establishes the Uganda People's Defense Forces. And incidentally, we've deliberately said in 1995, the UPDF, the NRA is baptized the UPDF, because the Constitution didn't change anything. It only said the name of NRA changes to UPDF. So in other words, from 1995, we were supposed to engage in a process to be able to restructure the UPDF and make it a national army, taking into account the normative principles that are provided for under Article 12 or Chapter 12 of the Constitution. But we've had we've looked at the different legislative milestones from that time up to the present, and this is what we've tried to explain, how the UPDF changes or does not change. Because in 1998, the then Minister of Defense, Stephen Kavuma, brought regulations to authorize the deployment of UPDF in DRC. Some of you may, those of you who were born at that time, you may recall that at that time, President Museveni had deployed the UPDF in the DRC, and there was contestation. So Stephen Kavuma brought regulations to regulate the deployment of forces, and the Parliament refused to pass them, and said there was need for a comprehensive law to govern the UPDF. So that did not pass. But in 2000, we have the National Security Council Act. The National Security Council Act, these are very interesting pieces of legislation. Our view is that we haven't paid enough attention to some of these pieces of legislation, because the National Security Council Act establishes an entire structure from the national to the district to the sub-county. So you basically you're looking at a national security committee at the sub-county, and we begin to see the level of securitization and militarization of the society, taking that vertical approach up to the local level. So that's 2000. In 2003, the then Defense Minister Mama Mbabazi introduced another law, a bill, the UPDF bill, 2003. Again, that bill was contested. It went into limbo. It did not proceed until 2005, when it was activated. And that is when the debate on the UPDF Amendment Act 2005 started. So this act, until recently, was actually the main framework for governing the UPDF. But one important point to note is that at the same time, around 2000 and 2004, there was a defense policy review, a comprehensive review of Uganda's defense architecture. One of the things we found interesting is that in the policy, there are policy objectives on defense for Uganda, and then the policy objectives on defense for the UPDF. And then the question is like, so who is who and what is what? So you begin to see the discord actually coming in the way the UPDF is organized and its mandate. But in the 2005, in the debate of the act, that's where you see the ghost of NRA coming to dominate in the military. So we've picked here a quote from Kaindo Tafire, who basically argued and said, because a number of issues were, one, the government wanted to legislate the original command of the UPDF as at 26 January 1986. And then, and the MPs were like, but why do we need this when this is now the UPDF? Because we are no longer NRA. You remember NRA recently, someone recently came with the paperwork and said he got a certificate of UPDF in 1982. It's the same ghost that is really eating us up. Yeah. So we are in UPDF, and then we are saying we need the commanders, we need the high command of the UPDF as it existed as of January 26, 1986. So Kahindo Tafire argued very strongly about the inclusion of these people, saying that they needed to nurture the UPDF. And unfortunately, he had included himself in the high command. When Amama Mbabazi published the list, he had excluded Kahindo Tafire. So Kahindo Tafire dropped off the list of the high command. So essentially what you have here are the list of the high command and then senior army officers as they existed as at 26 January 1986. So these are you'll find them in the law. And they have remained up to today. Because our argument is that the UP architecture and the DNA of this army is the NRA. So basically we've made a series of conclusions having looked at these at some of these what has happened over the years. That one is that what we've seen with the UPDF and all the amendments that have happened, including the 2025 bill, which I'm going to talk about briefly as I conclude, is that we've seen almost a military coup happen. And we call it a military coup by other means. A military coup, normally we know that the army organizes itself with their guns, they take over government. In our current situation, there are no guns. There's no shooting of bullets, but actually the army is taking over government. One is that, we have the tweeting general. Yeah, the tweeting general, the fact that a chief of defense forces can refer to a national army, this is my army, these are you call it, the choice army, the characterization basically reduces the character of the institution of the UPDF into a different animal. Because it just doesn't happen that way, that a national army can be characterized by anybody the way they wish. The second one is that we have the army in parliament. That has remained the case since 1995. And we know that in most cases, even the soldiers do not debate. So they are there as listening posts. And we've looked at how they have, all the time they have been there. When you see the changes, when you see the changes that now, from the junior officers, all you see now is that at this moment, you actually have 4-star generals in the parliament. So that has been changing again. The army and religion. The army has gotten deeply involved in religion. Either as sometimes you actually think that even when they are going on the front line, they ask for a prayer. This country has become so prayerful. I have been protesting the prayers as an agenda item because I said no. General, don't feel bad about it. I always say every agenda item is supposed to be discussed. So you can't have an item on the agenda which can't be discussed. But the point I'm trying to make is that when you look at the UPDF now, there is a way it has tilted towards more of spirituality. Whether that is good or not or bad, we are not really making any judgment. But to get a point, to the point where you have a person of a Rueru's character now running a church, and it's kind of like confusing, by the way. I don't know whether you guys get confused like me, because you see, you see the army functions, there are all these clergy people, and you feel like there's that capture. We've looked at the army and the cultural institutions, very deeply involved. Some of the chiefdoms now are run by army officers, and we believe that that's not by coincidence. And then, of course, we have looked at how the army has taken over the public service administration. That's something that is you can see across the board, that almost all institutions of state, the army has literally taken over, including some of the ministries. I think the Minister of Defense is like the classic example. Minister of Internal Affairs, where you have the senior minister, the deputy minister, the permanent secretary, the director for immigration, the director for citizenship. It's like a military installation altogether. And we don't think that that's by coincidence. Because the argument has been that these army officers are more They are more patriotic. They are more disciplined. When that happens, it means that the other institutions are basically they have collapsed basically. So you are trying to do a displacement. We've looked at the army and the economy, and that also has, you can see the trajectory very clear. Especially, I think this intensified after the Operation Wealth Creation, where the army officers were literally deployed in every sector or agency of government. You'll find there either the army officers working there, or if there are no employed army officers, you'll find what they call OWC coordinators. We've looked at all that. And then, of course, there's the capture of the Uganda police, which has really taken place over the time, and we have provided all the evidence to show how this has happened. And then army in elections, which again takes back the role that the army is playing today in elections is no different from what the role they played in 1980 elections. Just to conclude, by looking at the UPDF Amendment Act, we've characterized the UPDF Amendment Act as almost the return journey to the NRA. Why are we saying this? First of all, there were two bills. The first bill of 2024 was actually the most important aspect of that bill at that time was the introduction of health services initiative, or the establishment of health services for the UPDF. And so with the Supreme Court amendment in the Kabaziguruka case, the NRM people went blazing and said, no, we have to provide for the trial of civilians in the court martial. When you look at what the law does, and maybe we could look at just 2025, the 2025 bill introduced 81 new clauses, and 68 of these were these clauses were amending 68 sections, 53 by amendments, but also repeal of 15 sections. Normally, ordinarily, if we are really running a smart system, this is a law that would have required a repeal of the previous law and enactment of a new one. Yeah, because you see, it's not very easy to debate a bill that is amending a previous law to this extent. All you do is to confuse those MPs and make sure that they don't pay attention to what we are doing. And I think that's what was achieved. Because everybody, all the MPs, including all of us, focused on the trial of civilians. But essentially, the most important aspects of that law are not about the trial of civilians. That's just a consequence. It is not the problem. What is the problem with the law? And why are we saying that it is a return to the NRA? One is that law changes the composition of the UPDF. Because under the 2005 Act, the UPDF is comprised of two segments: the land forces. In the current law, they have codified the special forces as a service. Remember that in 2005, one of the most hotly debated issues was the Presidential Guard Brigade. If you remember, the PGB, that was one of the issues that was debated hotly. And Amama Mbabas had to come out and give assurances to MPs that there was no attempt to legislate the PGB, because then it was considered a presidential protection unit. Once the law was enacted and the PGB was excluded from the bill, the regime went ahead to construct the SFC into the force that it is now. So in other words, you can comfortably say that that is an illegal outfit, because the Constitution is the one that the Constitution provides that it is the Parliament to prescribe the composition and function of the UPDF. So what the president has done is to ask MPs to basically endorse what he has done over the last almost 25 years. The second issue that was debated intensively in 2005 was the reserve force. Because MPs were asking, why do you need to register the reserve force? Because reserve forces, in most cases, these are retired officers who have gone back to civilian life. There is a mechanism for recalling them when there is need. So again, that was rejected by members of parliament. But what the regime did is after the law, they went now under the Ministry for Veterans Affairs and constructed a whole service called the Reserve Force with the structures up to the sub-county level. In most cases, if you look at places where there is election violence, the Reserve Force is one. Members of the Reserve Force are some of the elements that actually perpetuate election violence at the local level. But these are structures that have been organized outside the law, and then the law now comes and endorses them. So that, for me, that is significant. Number two is what we've called the escape clause. There is a provision called auxiliary forces in that law, where the president as commander-in-chief can co-opt any group of armed, any group that is trained anywhere and make it part of the UPDF. And you know that's what has happened. The LDUs, the Amuka, is it Amuka boys? The different groups that have now, they go, in other words, I can go and start my militia group and train it. And afterwards, it is incorporated into the UPDF. When that happens, it means that it is happening outside the law, because Parliament is supposed to prescribe how you recruit and train UPDF officers. So that's it's a very dangerous clause. We can assume that Museveni would not use it, but a President Kamara can just bring all these groups into an army without following the right procedures. Number three is the fact that this law did not sort out the Defense Forces Council and the High Command. And again, this is one area where we don't pay attention. Under the Constitution and the National Defense Policy, the UPDF is supposed to be subordinate to civilian authorities. But what does that mean? How is that subordination expressed? In principle, the Defense Forces Council should be the civilian institution that prescribes policy and structure of the UPDF and how the UPDF is governed. That's the Defense Forces Council. So that's where you would find your civilian authorities. The High Command is the command of the army, which deals with command and control and administration. The trouble with our legislation, right from the 2005 Act to the current one, is that the Defense Forces Council, other than the president, the minister, the state minister, and I think if I recall the permanent secretary, Minister of Defense, other than those three, the rest of the members of the Defense Forces Council are the members of the High Command. So in other words, practically, there is no difference between the High Command and the Defense Forces Council. One would have expected that the legislators would have been looking at that to make sure that this underlying principle of subordination of the military to civilian authorities is achieved through the legal structure. And then, of course, the last one is what we've characterized as the unlawful combatants. With the UPDF Act, the 2025 Act, each one of you is an unlawful combatant. So in other words, if anybody is holding a gun around you, we can arrest you. It depends on it may depend on the mood of the arresting officer. But essentially what the law has done is to say, if you are connected to someone with a gun, if you are holding a gun, You do this, basically, you can be tried in the court martial. And but the major implication of this is that the regime itself has no trust in the civilian judiciary institutions, and that is a crisis. So in other words, there are two things that have happened, and that's what I will end up with. One is that the most important conclusion from this study is that over the years, President Museveni has constituted a completely parallel military government that is parallel to the civilian government. So on the civilian side, there is an executive arm of government, the president and his cabinet. There is the legislature. There is the judiciary. With the enactment of the UPDF Act 2025, there is an executive arm of the military, which is the Defense Forces Council, because it has executive authority. There's actually the president and the CDF. That's the executive. There's the legislature, which is the Defense Forces Council, which has basically been, even because the language that is even used in the law is that the Defense Forces Council can prescribe, which is the language that we use in law, relating to the legislature. And then now there's the judiciary. So you have two parallel governments. So in this scenario that we've described, the warrior mad king, we envisage a situation where actually President Museveni can ignore you, the civilian government, your MPs, your LC5 councillors, chairpersons. He can ignore you and deal with the military. And if you bring Manyanga, we can bring you to the military government and deal with you. That's what you are going to see as we move forward. But essentially what the UPDF Amendment Act, and read together, by the way, the one I didn't mention is the UPDF Establishment 2021. Now that is another important document that very difficult to read, but when you are a researcher, you have no choice but to read it. When you read the UPDF Establishment and the UPDF Act 2025, what you see is a complete shift of balance of power from we the people to the army. That at this moment, the most important action that we should be doing as citizens is how to get back our power from the military, because I think by every measure, legislative, financial, coercive power, the power has basically shifted to the UPDF or to the military, and that is our biggest question of the day. So thank you very much for listening to me. That's what I had to share with you.
Another round of applause to Godbear. In my view, this study is very explosive. And it's a kind of study in a country where we stay can actually explode. But I want to thank you, all of you, the co-authors, for I think you have taken time to look into Uganda's legislative agenda in the last 40 years, look into the Hansard in detail, study the policies of government, and see the impact or the influence of the military in all the sectors of the governance of our country. And so, you know, you have also taken us through some kind of military political history of Uganda. When you talked about 1980, two individuals having some sort of standing army, one had 24,000 men and women. But when they were going to the bush, we were told in the history that there are only 27. Did we live a life all this long? I don't know. 27,000 men. Where did they go? 24,000 men. Where did they go? For only us to hear that there are 27 who began the struggle. Maybe Greg can give us more information. But before we go in a question and answer session, ladies and gentlemen, there are two other co-authors. I think it's in order, if you allow. I just call two people, 2 minutes each one of them. I hope they are going to confirm your words. I hope they do. So may I invite Mr. Andrew Karamagi very briefly, because you are one of the authors, and after Bernard Musasi, then we can go in a question and answer session. Karamagi, please.
Thank you very much, Patrick. This is not a minority report. It is part of the majority. I'd like to underline a couple of things that have been shared in the broad presentation, but begin by appreciating Godba for that wonderful summary. Please, a round of applause for Godba. What you've had is a fraction of, let me give an example of the UPDF establishment document, which is 2,038 pages long. And we notice that it's deliberately written in we suspect that it's written in a deliberately jumbled manner so that it's hard to make sense of it. Just when you cover 100 pages, you think, but I saw something here that's contradictory. So it's a mess, and making sense of it is difficult. But I think that's deliberate. Okay, so I'd like to add to the conclusions that we've drawn. The other being that we observe the UPDF, particularly under the Chief of Defense Forces. In the full paper, you will see a timeline or an illustration that shows you how much power people like former heads of the Special Forces Command had compared to General Muhoozi Kainerugaba. And in this respect, I'd like to talk about the UPDF or General Muhoozi Kainerugaba's preponderant or overbearing role in Uganda's foreign policy. He has become someone above the Minister of Foreign Affairs, has rendered that ministry incapable of determining policy or making deployments in that in foreign affairs. That's one additional conclusion. And we see the UPDF's footprint across the continent in words that some might find harsh, but what we see as the reduction of the UPDF into a mercenary force that is available for the highest bidder, be it the Pentagon or other economic or military interests across the continent. The other additional conclusion is there are three, so I'll keep within the time limit, Mr. Kamara. The other is that when we talk about the auxiliary forces, please do not limit yourself to what you've heard my colleague Godba mentioning with respect to Arrow Boys, Amoka Boys, and so on. Please include those that you have seen in recent episodes, such as Boda Boda 2010. But if you've forgotten that one, in the Kawempe by-election, we saw vigilantes dressed in military fatigues giving orders. It's there. At once it appears, and like a ghost, it disappears. Many people claim to have seen it, but few have touched it. Many people talk about love, but few have felt it or have experienced it. Finally, I'd like to use the analogy of football to explain something that Godba has mentioned regarding the Defense Forces Council and the High Command. I think it will help the public and those here to appreciate better the dilemma that we have. Because as lawyers, we are tempted to explain things in legalistic terminologies, and we might miss out on having other people appreciate what we're trying to say. So there's a number in football called a false nine, used by coaches like Pep Guardiola, who a false nine can play an attacking role, can play a midfield role, can play a defensive role. It's just that you, the opponents, do not know when they'll be playing what role. We have a Defense Forces Council and a High Command that we don't know when they're sitting as a council and when they're sitting as a High Command. And because the composition is the same, we don't know if some of them could carry the same meeting minutes from the council into the minutes of the High Command. And at the end of the day, you have a jumbled mess that is difficult to make sense of. I'm going to end on an unfamiliar note and thank my co-authors because usually processes like these are thought to be possible only when you have donor funding. I'd like to reveal that my colleagues have exceeded the call of duty, have picked money out of their own pockets to engage in this research. Please clap for them. It's the least that you can do for the work they've done. My colleague, Bennett, you're welcome. And I would request that we raise bail money for him, because some of the things he has done to acquire this information might not be bailable offenses under General Yorim Museveni. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. I hope to take 30 minutes. I think my colleagues have done a good job. My name is Bennett Musasizi. Two things that were not mentioned. This publication looks at the different rebel formations, I'll put that in quotes, that appear towards every election cycle from 2001 to date. Actually, they are, we managed even to capture 2025. And then in response to those that disappear immediately after the elections. The other thing that wasn't mentioned are the vigilante groups, mostly a response to state oppression by the opposition and those that are still active. That's all. Thank you so much.
A round of applause to all the authors. Thank you very much. This is a very interesting kind of discussion, but was it strategic for you, Godber, and Job, to talk about them without them? Where are they? I expected maybe a Kulaija here or something like that. To talk about them without them, is it fair? Oh, okay, you're organizing a special one. Okay, because I think it would be very fair for them, at least one or two guys with their shining peeps, to be here to listen, not for this one. Okay, for they are coming for the main launch. Okay. Okay, so you've had the pre-launch, the scenarios that have been built. We have a king, he's a warrior, but he's also mad. That could be very interesting. So what do you make of the report that you have had? I want to hear your views. I'm sure you want to hear from each other. And this is the moment when you can also have your say. And the general want to go first. Can I have a microphone taken around? Please, the guys in charge of the auditorium, this auditorium, the hotel. You put up your hand, tell us your name and where you're from. Right there, right there. Okay, for the interest that of those who are capturing this, it would be better if you come in front so that these microphones can also capture your views. Thank you. General, could you come in front here so that the your audio can also be captured by these televisions?
Wow.
I might have to review that request moving forward, because if everybody is going to the podium,
it's going
that
to
won't work.
A lot of time.
Yeah. Okay.
I think. I'd like to thank the team of the authors for work, research well done. I try and make a few comments and then run, because it looks like, unfortunately, we've run through, beyond our scheduled time. I had fixed another appointment somewhere. All authoritarian regimes always create architecture for security control of the citizenry. It's just obvious. And normally they use the state security apparatus as tools for suppression of any dissent. That has always been the case since the beginning of time. So this is nothing new. And maybe to first respond to what was asked about the 27. The Fronasa forces, when they joined, when they were merged into unity, and then the war in Ruero started, those who, even when they had opportunity to join the bush, who left, by the time we took power, I don't think there were even more than 1,000 out of about 15,000. So the rest simply remained in the, the UNLA, even those who had opportunity didn't leave. Maybe someone could do research and find out why that would happen. But the tendency of human beings, when they're in a position where they think that they are secure, they'll stay there. That's part of humanity. We even see it happening now. The comments I wanted to make were, what attracted me most, and I think what concerns us, because much as we look at this study, it's a good foundation on the basis of which we can try to see how to shape the future, different from what is. So the last, I don't know whether to call it, I think it was the last bullet where there was unlawful combatants, trial of civilians in the military courts, is the most significant in as far as I'm concerned in this whole study. Because the rest of the study captures what happened in the past. It's part of our history. There were opportune moments when things could have been different. One, for example, 1964, when there were mutinies in Uganda, Kenya, Tanzania. I think Uganda at that time it was KAR. There was a mutiny here. They arrested the Minister of Defense, the late Felix Onama, held him in what eventually became Gaddafi Garrison, Jinja. What did Uganda do? What did Kenya do? What did Tanzania do? The only country which took a different position was Tanzania. It used that opportunity, dismantled what used to be the King's African Rifles, and started afresh from a fresh foundation. Here, nothing like that happened. It's so surprising that the two coups also which took place, look at those who were in command. First, General Amin. General Amin didn't even reach P7. Look, second time, General Rutua. General Rutua also left in primary, but they were commanders of the army. But there are many educated Ugandans, there are many educated people in the forces. But it's not, that's just, so currently, the question to me, the most critical question that we need to look at is, how on earth would a parliament in which more than 300 members are members of the ruling party, which ruling party is the one that supervises what we are talking about now, the current status of things. Educated, but also representing the rest of the country. That's what the dilemma is. Since you are researchers, it would be interesting for you to find out, for example, now, in the primaries now, in 2025, and the ones in 2021, you'll find that a significant number of people who are running for primaries of NRM. Do research. How many believe in NRM? For me, when I bump into them, you'll find that about out of 10, those who believe in NRM could be about 2. The rest don't. But they still run on that ticket. Then you could also find out what are the levels of education? What are the professions they're in? Because you find many doctors, many lawyers, many teachers, professionals of all kinds, accountants and the rest in there. But they pass such a law. So where is the problem? The status of the political environment in any country is a reflection, in as far as I can see, of the levels of consciousness of the citizenry, 1. 2 is also a reflection of the character of the elite. So to solve this problem, you have to deal with those 2. Before you deal with them, it will continue, deepen further. There is no end to this until there is a level of consciousness in the citizenry, a deliberate effort to raise it, but the most critical and immediate one is the character of the elite. You work on that, you resolve that, this one can easily be made history. May God bless you all.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
I'm sorry, God burn. Andrew, I have to run. Thank you.
Okay. Now, I will not be able to give each one of you the kind of time I've given to General Muntu. First of all, he has some kind of institutional memory. At one point, he was the command of the army. He was also in the bush. So he has many things. He's also, he's been a presidential candidate. He's a political leader. So I gave him a little more time. I may not give you the same kind of time. But he said something, the character, a reflection of the character of the elite. That's us. That is us, people. So who is going first? Yes, I have a hand there. I have Timothy Kalegira. We're going to go that side first. Your name and where you're from, kindly make it precise and concise.
Thank you so much. My name is Dina Nabwire. And thank you so much, Godba. I think my point does align with the thinking about the character of the elite. And what I had noted for myself was a curiousness around an alternative model for democracy in our continent. And this is because part of the initial analysis that you provided in the foundation was referring to, for example, the Woodrow Wilson data and all of that. And I was just wondering, is it safe then to assume that we continue to peg ourselves on some global models around democracy, some of which are even crumbling in our sight at the moment, and therefore wondering how sustainable this is? And I really loved and appreciated the pre-colonial history that you provided. And in the same spirit, I was still wondering again around, for example, the Imperial British East Africa, and when you said we inherited an army. So then my question was, did we actually inherit an army or did we inherit a governance system? So thinking about levels of ideology, orientations, and what we see today to be a very typical Machiavelli kind of, get power, stay in power, do anything possible to keep that power. And from that angle, then wondering why are we surprised for that. So my last one, which aligns with the character of the elite, is agreeing with the general around raising a level of consciousness that I'm calling opportunities to revolutionize think tanks and for us to be able to disrupt, because I think there are things that need to change, but we're building them on a foundation that wants to align with what's existence, which I think is a problem. Thanks.
Thank you, Dina. I saw Timothy and the gentleman back there.
Okay, the gentleman is Peter Majela.
Yes.
Thank you, Godband team, for this research. When you are talking about that introductory bit, I asked myself a question. Do we think Museveni feels safe? Me, I don't think he feels safe. And if he doesn't feel safe, maybe it explains the whole thing you were talking about when it comes to safety. But then there is a whole parallel army system. I don't know if it's in the report, but you look at, we know the government as executive, legislature, and judiciary. So we have executive, where we have the UPDF occupying different ministries and different departments and all that. Then we have the legislature, so we have UPDF in the legislature and it's fully there. Then we have the judiciary, where we have the army courts, which are now trying citizens. We have the army prosecutors. We have the UPDF chambers. We have JAT, which is doing criminal investigation. We have crime intelligence, which is army. So actually we have UPDF is a whole government with executive, legislature, and judiciary. parallel running with ours, which also undermines what we have in Article 2082, which says that the army is subordinate to civilians. So we have civilians there on their table and the army there on their table with all the structure. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. And please pardon my poor eyesight, Peter. I couldn't have called you gentleman when I know your name. I think my eyes are really gone. Timothy.
No, on the last minute, I just thought I would just hand to someone else. As I just decided to withhold my views, let me just give the microphone to someone else.
Okay. Mr. Kakuru.
Mr. Kato.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you so much. And I would want to applaud the team for the good work they have done. But 2 points for me. And the best is about adopting an army. When Godba was talking about it, it's like we adopted and then had some changes along the way. But I was telling my colleague here that even when you reach at the quarter guards of the UPDF, it is UPDF stroke NRA. So we have the same outfit. And then the trial of civilians in the general court martial. My biggest issue is not that the regime or the state lacks trust in the civilian judicial system, but it is a bigger issue that the state feels that civilians are not commanded according to what they wish, and they would want somebody to be in charge of the judicial system who can take commands and do what they exactly want. Because if it was all about lack of trust in the judicial system, why would they take over NADS? Why would they take over agriculture, construction, and everywhere? So they want people that can take commands, that can be instructed and ordered to do what they believe in, and that's what the problem is. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kato. Okay, there's somebody very close to you.
Thank you so much. My name is Melvin Nasasura, and I would like to appreciate the researchers for the good work. For me, most importantly, I've been impressed by the way they have traced back Uganda's military history back to pre-colonial times. And as of recent, I have come to understand that most of the problems that we have in this country cannot be understood fully without actually going back and tracing it back to the pre-colonial era and the colonial era. But what stood out even more is that is how we see the military has been changed through amendments and all those to reshape it to mirror what a rebel outfit, the NRA is, should be operating. And the command culture, like everything in the army, is all points to the fact that it is actually a rebel outfit. And it explains a lot about how the military operates today and how civilian authority has been weakened. So my question is how do we go from here? What can the researchers actually, is there a way we can come back together as a country, as a nation, to actually move out of this chaos that we have found ourselves in? And how do we do that? If the researchers can actually give some notes on that.
Thank you very much. I see Michael, Mr. Aboneka at the back.
Yeah, thank you very much, I'm Aboneka. 3 points, and I want to thank the researchers. How do we move forward? I think that, let me just start with a quick one. 2 years ago, we were asking the question of where is SFC in terms of the law? Now they have legitimized it. Is it possible that we go backwards and start to look at the things SFC has done and hold them accountable? Because now that they have legitimized them, it means that they were legitimate before. Is there a process that we can hold them accountable? The second one is, I think we all agree that the army needs to get out of parliament. And how we do that, is some bit of hope. The same from police and the rest. Lastly, for me, is we need to talk about the independent civilian oversight authority. South Africa has it, Kenya has it, and all the other countries, where you have an independent civilian oversight over whatever security system you're going to have as a country. Because once we have that, then we'll be able to bring back the power to the people, that the people can hold the military accountable. But as of now, we cannot.
Thank you very much. Zach?
Thank you very much. I think the value of this is that which is very helpful, and so thank you very much to the research team, is to bring this into public conversation about the military and its role in the governance of this country. So I really want to appreciate this, and hopefully it can be taken to various spaces and places, because the story of the control of the means of violence is a huge issue for us. My question to the researchers is that, especially relating to your big story, the shift in the balance of power from we the people to the military, I find the narrative you've presented shows that the people have never had power. So I don't know why you are saying that the story is saying there is need for a shift in the balance of power from we the people to the military. The people have never had it. So that's what you've told us. So why are you now saying? So I don't know why you did this, Godba. No, so the people have never had power. The narrative is very clear. So that's the first point I think. I think the other is we possibly will need to reflect with you on what you look at milestones. I like to argue that it's problematic to assume, as you do in your research, that the 1995 Constitution is a milestone event. I think that's actually a problem. I think the failure to reflect deeply on the politics of the 1995 Constitution and the role of the military in the crafting of the same is itself problematic. And I think that you're grounding your argument in a 1995 Constitution, which itself is problematic. And I think it buys into the narrative that the story of progress for this country begins in 1986, which therefore anchors it in 1995. So I think that there will possibly be more conversation on the different milestones, but the particular is the way in which there is a process of metamorphosis in the way in which the military act in the control of power in this country. I would submit myself that we are yet to experience with the people.
Thank you. I'm going to shift to the middle section. We've not heard from them, and I'm going to take 2 more or 3 more in the interest of time.
Thank you. Thank you, the research team, for a job well done in the research and the presentation. My question is, today, I also found out today, that we focused on the military court and left the bigger picture of what the bigger problem was, which is what we do a lot in this country. Some people like to call it diversion, but I think they are actually the ones that focus on the irrelevant. Okay, it's relevant, but it's not the big deal. We're all thinking, oh, people are in military court, but there's this whole big problem that's going on that you highlighted today. So how do we get us to see the bigger picture before these bills are in Parliament, so that when we are advocating for what should be done right, we focus on the big picture instead of the small things that are fronted as the big things. Thank you.
Okay, Charles.
Thank you so much, Ndugu Kamara, and thanks to the researchers. Godbard, Andrew, Joseph, thank you so much for a good job. My name is Charles Odongtho, and I'm a journalist and a lawyer. I want to raise just 2 things. for reflection, but more importantly, for Godba and the team. I know they might be hard practically, but do we sometimes think in terms of going forward and thinking of a lasting solution about the kind of training that our military officers go through? And part two of that is, how about the kind of background that some of our military officers come from? And, you know, we always say the devil is in the detail. And I think that that detail is very important. I think that someone talked about a reflection of the society we come from and the kind of training that we undergo that makes what we eventually do. Perhaps it is important to Godba to start thinking about doing that research. The second part of that is the one which I was saying might be hard to do. Do you think about doing a research, individually talk to some of these commanders, what they think quietly, even if it means, you know, having deep conversations? Because we have seen military commanders who deviate from the normal and from the directives, the orders. Of course, they land into trouble. But for research purposes, and like Bishop Zach said, that to create debate, public debate about some of these things going forward, perhaps it is important for us to get to know, if you talk to 40 senior military officers in confidence, hear what they say and what they actually think about the status quo and whether they are really happy about what is going on and what they actually think are the solutions. Right. I want to end with the vivid example that General gave us. The two coups, the 1971 coup and the 1985 coup, you know, both of them were led by illiterate commanders. Doesn't that speak to something that we need to also interrogate maybe in a research like this? Thank you.
Thank you. There is a hand here in front, and then we shall conclude with the, we have Angela and the Harold. Yes.
Thank you, Patrick. Godwin Toko is my name. I just have two things to say. One, the first is there's always this, I'm not saying Charles has said it, but it kind of came out, that the army is a reflection of our society. I always tend to disagree with that because it is not. The UPDF picks the best among us for the role of being military officers, invests a lot of money training them to be the best version of military people, and they even refresher courses. So when they make, when things like human rights violations come up, I'm not saying he said it, but it keeps coming up that, oh, they're a reflection of our society. No, they are not. It's because the system has allowed them to go rogue, and so they become rogue. Now, to Godba and the people authored the paper. So there's this fact we know that the UPDF is more like a command post of the West, yeah? Doing all their data biddings, whether it's in Somalia, getting their support, it's more or less an extension of the armies of the West. So as the people of Uganda, the civil society, is there still leverage to use that? That we can't, these guys can't listen to you, they can't listen to us. They are doing this as a sport now, beating people and all that. But can we find a way probably to nudge their bosses, whether in Washington, Paris, or London, and maybe make some inroads, some positive steps that then can make the army better? Because, well, if things go south, they too will lose in as much as we will lose. Thank you.
Thank you. Gerald here, and then Mr. Harold, and Kaija, and then Angel.
Thank you. We certainly can't thank enough the researchers. We really appreciate the great work. Now, I would like to invite us to particularly interrogate the Kasese massacre and specifically the debate that was in Parliament at that time. This particular afternoon, the army, the soldiers that are in Parliament, are pressed hard to explain how on earth a trained
military with all the equipment, all the exposure, and walk into a palace and massacre in their broad light largely civilians who could easily have been neutralized. And here what the CDF then, General Katumba Wamala says. He was very emphatic. He said, there are orders that are given by the CDF and the command structure. And there are other orders. And so I want to be clear that this is not one of the orders that was given by the CDF and the army structure. The reading of that was very clear. That one, as a CDF, he did not want to own what had transpired in Kasese. That two, that indeed, as the researchers have clearly told us, that there is a clear distinction between the army that we see in uniform parading as the UPDF, but actually the real function of the army is a personalized army. And he made that clear. And now for me, it takes me to basically want us also to relate to that is happening in Sudan. Between the RSF and the Sudanese army, SAF, as they call it, led by Burhan, General. If you read that keenly, you realize that the creation of more or less two armies could certainly have been the source of the conflict that they are going through. So you want to deeply interrogate and juxtapose what's transpiring there and what we are seeing evolving every other day. And then lastly, the elections of 2016, I was in Ntungamo running. I saw the army all over the place. They were jumping over perimeter walls, put us under house arrest, beat up people. But the people are firm. People came together in huge numbers, and indeed, they more or less repulsed the army because they realized that this was going to be so much of a bloodshed, and they withdrew. In 2021, the numbers of the deployed officers were more than tripled. And the levels of intimidation and fear among the populace had actually increased. And so what we are seeing is a skyrocketing, a high increase of militarization of the politics of our country, and largely to send citizens into fear so that they can govern us as long as they wish. I think this is one of the best avenues, this engagement, this research, that we take this to the people, we talk about this, and that's why I would like to end by thanking the researchers for doing an amazing job of what many people would consider very sensitive. Thank you, and we hope this can open up a
Thank you,
serious
Gerard.
debate.
Give the microphone to Harold, and you talked about the Kasese massacre. Ladies and gentlemen, I want you to keep that in your mind. In my view, that Kasese issue will not go away. It will haunt, it will rise from the ashes like the Egyptian phoenix. Watch it, keep it in the back of your mind. Whether it takes 10, 20, or 30 years, that thing will come back.
Thank you so much, Patrick, and I want to thank the researchers. I want to thank my brother Gerard for bringing out the issue of Kasese, because the one thing about Kasese, there are names that are not mentioned who are in charge of those directives. That goes to what I want to speak about today. When I look at the military in Uganda, we do not have a military dictatorship as defined in other countries where there are military dictatorship. What we are having is a warlord. What we are having is like the Wagner group. What we are having is like the group of Dagalo in Sudan. When you see
how the army operated recently, you saw them, they were increasing their salaries. It wasn't Parliament doing so. Because there was a request in Parliament of the money of the intern doctors, the money wasn't there. Teachers wanted the money, they're being told to wait a little. But these who work for an individual, who work for the family, whoever they want, they promote. Even when the laws are there for somebody to retire, you can't retire. So when we do not look at how what was named the UPDF, Kamara must have had Brigadier Mayombo defining what the UPDF was supposed to mean and what we have today. People forget that if you go on the rolls of the UPDF, the register, nobody's register is DF, it is RO. Resistance what? Office and number something. So the word UPDF remains among the peoples of Uganda. But what Mr. Museveni looks at, he looks at his army. That's why when you see how his son operates, he's actually like a de facto third number two. You know, we have many number twos in this country, beside Major Alupo, who people think about, but there's another number two. So if we don't look at it as that way, that we do not have an army for the people of Uganda, we do not have a military government, but a cabal, a group of soldiers working for an individual in this kind of transition. So if we want to deal with this kind of transition, we must deal in how we disengage the military from the person who captured it to make it Ugandan, and then we define the transition we want. My brother Godba, thank you so much for the work. Well done. How I wish even other players who are actually doing politics think about the transition more than you guys. But other guys are just looking about something else. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Angela. And that's going to be the last comment or question.
Thank you, and thank you to the authors. Particularly, thank you to Andrew Karamaji for the invite. My reflection is going to be on the people. I would like to return to we the people. I think maybe this is a subject of another study. What does peace and stability mean in the minds of the people? There's that landmark place that people like, whether it's a landmark is another question. We like to return to 1986 and say peace was ushered in. But what is that actual peace? People spoke about being able to sleep. Finally, they could sleep. Nowadays, that has changed to if you don't disturb the army, if you don't provoke them, as the military, you will have peace. So I think we need a study on peace and stability. And I think that is what is really holding back the minds of our people to think critically about the military and its role. Because, and I find this disturbing even in the minds of many young people that I see on the digital spaces. They have that thinking that, you know, if you don't provoke, if you don't disturb the status quo, you'll quietly make your money, have your job, and life will go on. And this is why it's very hard to get rid of the current structure. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for your contributions. At least you have had your say. And let me also conclude somehow closely related to what Angela has said. You know, if you look at all the public institutions in Uganda, many people would think that the UPDF is the institution that still has a pulse, is an institution that seems to be efficient, is an institution that has been able to hold it together for the last 4 decades, an institution that is revered across the continent. And as Angela says, many people are saying, an institution that has given them peace. Probably that's not true. But how would you reconcile those views from the people? How they look at the institution of the UPDF that they think is thick, from what you're saying. Goodbye. Could you respond?
Yeah, thanks very much, everybody, for those quite informative and provocative comments. I've tried to summarize a couple of them so that I can spend less time to respond to them. But let me start with Patrick's comments. Yeah, I think for many of us, I think many Ugandans used to hold that opinion. UPDF is this efficient, disciplined force, because there's also the narrative. You know, when something is said repeatedly, normally it becomes like the norm. So UPDF is a disciplined army, it's a people's army. Sometimes you get into the mode that that's what it is. I actually used to give a pass to UPDF until I saw it's one of its four-star generals, Kainerugaba, blatantly violated the constitution during those birthday campaigns. And then the UPDF, the commander-in-chief, and the UPD administration could do nothing. They all looked helpless and hopeless. So then I realized, I said, oh, the institution we thought was the remaining solid institution actually is also a victim of the brokenness that we are dealing with. So in other words, it has showed us that the UPDF has inherent weaknesses and inherent contradictions because it's a product of this history that we are dealing with. So the sleep, I think it's a narrative. You know, and I think that as researchers we are not really doing enough to be able to be able to dissect some of these narratives, because you see the UPDF is for keeping peace, but the issues that we are not dealing with here, when you see the UPDF on the streets, that's not peacekeeping. That's called law enforcement. It's called law and order. Law and order and peace are different things. And I've already said, peace is actually an outcome. Peace is not a product you can touch. Peace is an outcome. You have conditions of stability, of security, of safety, of law and order, then the result is peace. But when you hear someone saying you that I have given you peace, you need to be very suspicious, because you can't deliver peace without the conditions for peace. A couple of issues that were raised. Basically, Dina raised the question of alternative models for democracy. That is always a consistent debate in academic circles. Should Africa has alternative models for democracy? Of course, here we tried one. We tried the movement system, and then we ran off from it, or at least someone came and tried the movement system, and then it didn't work. So you can think of many other systems. I have refused to think that actually democracy is a model that it's a package that you can get and deliver. My view is that democracy is about freedom. It's a free people. You can choose. You can do this. Probably that if there was a free and fair election where we chose a dictator and said, we want you to rule us this way, and we have agreed, I would think that that's democracy. Because we have all agreed that that's how we want to be ruled. That democracy is about respect for human rights. You can't tell me that the Western world wants people in the Western world want their rights to be respected, and for us we don't. I think that because human beings have a certain inherent value called human dignity, that we are supposed to respect the dignity of the human person. Whether we like each other or not, whether I know you or not, I'm supposed to look at you as a human being and fight for your respect for your human dignity. I think that, so I try to look at, because democracy normally, when we talk about it, people start thinking of the elections, one man, one vote, but I think that's really too much reductionist in terms of democracy, rather than seeing democracy. We have freedom, we have equal opportunity, we have shared prosperity, we respect each other, we respect human dignity. So for me, that's how we look at it. So when we say Western models versus other models, I'm always reluctant to be drawn into that discussion of the different models, because I want to look at the human beings, human beings as the conditions in which we live, and that we are being respected as a people, and our choices and freedoms are being respected. Bishop Zach, the narrative of people having power. My view is that we have to start somewhere. We always have to try to find somewhere we can start. So that's why we said 1995 is a junction. 1979 was a junction. Our view was that having gotten Amin's army, so the Uganda army having been like destroyed, let me put it that, destroyed in quotes, because now the army has been destroyed. That as a people, if we had the mechanism, we could have come together and build a national army and maybe even control it, because we have built it. But because of the conditions that we are in, probably that agenda was never pursued, and the people who knew how important it is to own an army went on a spree to then recruit an army. So we failed. So the reason we have looked at 1995 as a timeline is say, and I already said 1995 Constitution definitely has its own imperfections. But at the end of the day, we have it. In that Constitution, again, when you go to the preamble, it's a declaration of victory. Whether it was forced victory, I think that's probably the argument you are making. Basically, we are saying, we the people, we are making this Constitution ourselves. Now, it's very easy to argue that, no, this was given to us by NRA. I think that's still a valid argument. But I remember very well, I was in Mbara High School then. I was in, I think, S5, S6. The Odochi Commission report. They came and consulted us, and we felt very good that we were being consulted on how we want to be governed. Yeah? These things of term limits, some of us have been very passionate about them. For the young people here, some of us were there, we were debating and said, no, we don't want to see a life president again. So put term limits, put age limits, those things. So for me, when these things were changed, they become personal because we are talking about them, knowing that if you don't put them there, you have a life president. So the point I'm making is that 1995 became an opportunity because no matter the imperfections of the Constitution, I always call it like a minimum governance consensus. This is the minimum we could agree on, because we are coming from a very bad history, so probably we couldn't agree on major things. But the idea that we want a military that is subordinate to civilian authority was cardinal. Now we can then ask ourselves why. And I think that's where Bishop Zach has a point, because as we've noted in the paper, it takes us 10 years to enact a law to implement the provisions of the 1995 Constitution as far as the military is concerned. So that means that the guys who gave us the Constitution probably were even never interested. If they had a way, maybe there would even be no provisions on the army in the Constitution. But they were there, and I think the argument we are making is that we made the declaration, we created the principles that should define a national army, and over the last 25 years, we have failed to live by those principles. On the contrary, we are back to where we were. So we still have, I think, Kato, you need to get me that picture. You said UPDF stroke NRA. Yeah, because and I think that's the point raised by Charles and I think General Muntu of like, these people, the soldiers, how they are trained, where they trained, their background. In writing this paper, we talked to a number of army officers. As I said, it is very, very sensitive to talk about UPDF in this country. So the officers themselves, they are very, very sensitive to talk about, to give their opinions. So we can't quote them, we can't cite them. But what you get is that you have army officers who believe that they are in UPDF because it's their profession and it's a professional army. Very clearly. And I have to give them credit. These are very, you remember that, I think it's Gerard who mentioned it. These are highly trained professional officers. So I think they are held hostage like all of us are held hostage. Because when you listen to Museveni now and his son, for them they are thinking of NRA. These army officers are thinking of UPDF. Museveni, you have heard him. If you have followed, because of the research we do, we track some of his, most of his statements. So increasingly, you will hear Museveni talk about NRA, not UPDF. And I believe that if this was a functional government, if this was a government that has proper structures of power, checks and balances, if you are a president and you called the National Army NRA, probably you would be impeached. Yeah, because that's treason. Yeah, to get a national army and then call it a rebel group, that's treason. And unfortunately, the character of the elite. So those people who are normally in his audience, they crap. Yeah. So you begin to see that this is a very, very unconscious society. That's one of the quotes that we have there in the paper is the one of February 6th, the last NRA day. I'm sure Charles, you were there, isn't it? That confirms that Charles was there. So basically, Mohoz in his speech, you remember, he says that the UPDF and NRA predates the laws that are being enacted. He was commenting about the Supreme Court ruling. Basically, he was basically saying UPDF and NRA are the law. And remember that even when we are talking about civilian control, subordination civilian authority, the Chief of Defense Forces is the one who gave what you would consider a policy speech on a national army day like that. The Minister of Defense who should have been speaking was an MC. Do you guys see the contradiction? Yeah, the minister was an MC. So that's basically the kind of crisis that we are talking about. The other thing that shows you that we are dealing with NRA is that the Army Day is February 6th. The UPDF Day should be the day of the Constitution, because that's when you have the UPDF. So in terms of the architects of the NRA, what you have as UPDF is actually NRA. And I think that's why, that's why even Museveni, for him is very clear, by the way, that many people don't understand him. That's why, because he tries to tell you that this is my army. Because every time he's talking about it, including those of you who are NRM, he tells you, this is my party. Because he tells you that this party, we started it in 1960. None of you guys were there in 1960. So you belong to someone's party. Yeah. So basically, I think that Bishop, that's the way I would really reflect on that. That in the absence of major, because you see, we could have said 1986, the fundamental change. But we avoid this kind of timelines because we say, if you have colonialism, you have 1962, that's independence. You have 1995, that's a new constitution. So probably in terms of milestones, you could look at that. the point about the coups being led by uneducated officers, I think the uneducated officers only happened to be in charge. These coups could have happened even with educated officers. So I think the key question should be, how did we get the military to be led by uneducated officers? And I think that, again, it's probably historical. But just to emphasize the point that General Monto made here, when we had the mutinies of 1964, that's when a number of changes were made. When that Minister Felix Onama was arrested, was held hostage. That's the time when the headquarters of the army were brought to Bombo, actually. At that time, the headquarters were in Jinja. So the headquarters of the army were brought to Bombo and Tumbuya. And that's when the General Service Unit was established. And one of the other organs, one led by Idi Amin, was made army commander, and Oporoto was made the chief of intelligence. But essentially, I think these officers were there. So today we have educated, highly educated, qualified, professional officers. And maybe that's what is helping us to maintain some semblance of order, because otherwise, if you saw what happened in Kawempe, you realize that we can have a crisis on our hands if the military was to behave, if that behavior was to be, perpetuated every other time. Godwin, UPDF as a command post of the West. I actually think that I give credit to the UPDF as a force. My view is that one of the things, the indirect consequences of Museveni's wanting an army to keep him in power is that he has been able to allow UPDF to recruit and train professional officers. So in other words, that for me, I call it like an indirect benefit of what he has been trying to do. But having said that, I think you have to give credit that these are highly trained professional officers. I think that the Pan-African posture is okay. The only contradiction is why when they come home, they are used as an instrument of oppression. So it's really a very serious contradiction that we have to interrogate, that you have an army, basically what that has proved to be a lethal fighting force within the region, projecting a Pan-African posture, and yet being used as an instrument of oppression at home. That we have to really be able to interrogate it. And I know, because I think, like General Muntu said, some of us who talk to senior army officers, they don't like the instrumentalization of the military that we see. Many officers don't like it. But you see, the way everybody is hiding, because in this country, everybody is hiding. Yeah. So even the army officers are hiding. Yeah. There is an invisible power that you have to be careful of. All these business people you see in town, everybody is scared of something that they don't know. Yeah. So that's I think that's the crisis that we are faced with, and we have to talk about these things if we are to really to make progress. So the final comment I would make really is on what does peace and stability mean? I think that's one narrative that has really made it difficult for us to even to understand what we are talking about. Because the Museveni's main delivery is peace. So in other words, I've given you peace. Yeah? So you can do everything. As long as you have peace, you can do everything. But now he's saying you can have peace if you don't disturb NRA. So if you disturb NRA, the peace can go. So it's a very tough situation we are in. But I think bottom line is that we need to challenge ourselves more about the peace. I already said there is a difference between peace, security, and stability. So security produces stability. Stability produces conditions for peace. I think that in Uganda right now, if you look at the landscape and you go to the rural areas where we meet people and we interact with the people, and you look at now what's happening with some of the area in some of the areas with NRM primaries, you can realize that all that we have is absence of war. Yeah, but because so the incumbent regime defines the peace as there are no riots, there are no protests, so there is peace. But man, if you see those people in the ghetto, let me end with this story. In 2010, Edgar, you are here. You remember? I think we first met in 2010 or 11. 10. So in 2010, I started interacting with these young people. I had come from an NGO background. So you know the NGOs we started at the end of the 1990s and the beginning of 2000s. So now, in 2010, I started meeting these Edgars with their NGOs. So Edgar was heading an NGO called Unemployed Graduates, isn't it? Yeah. When we started in 2000, I started a called Advocates Coalition for Development and Environment. I was going to solve environmental problems. Someone is trying to solve the jobless problem. So I remember that time after we had met, this one I've never told you. After we met and then we talked with other people, I scheduled a meeting with the late Keith Mahakanizi, former PSST, who was my close friend. So I talked to him, I told him, I said, you know what? There is a big problem in this country. This youth jobless problem is big. And you have to figure out interventions to deal with it. Deliberate interventions, not these general. We talked, and of course, Keith never paid attention to the problem. Nobody paid attention because there were really no interventions designed to deal with the youth joblessness. So in 2021, when Bobby Wine and his ghetto youth came up, I was never surprised because we had produced the ghetto. Now we had to deal with it. Unfortunately, we had to end up killing people. So these issues that we are researching on, we are talking about, we have to be able to, we have to have the courage and the boldness to deal with them because the last point was about what next. In my other works, I have argued that Uganda, we are in such a critical, we are at such a critical moment that we cannot transition this country to a stable and prosperous democracy through an election. It's simple and practical. Secondly, any election where President Museveni is on the ballot, that's a violent election. You don't have to go to debate. You don't have to do research. Because the institutions of state have been configured to be able to deliver President Museveni as president. So they will do everything. Gerard didn't tell you one thing, that they had to establish a barracks in Ntungamo to make sure that no opposition leader or an independent like Gerard becomes an MP in the municipality. How can you be an opposition MP in Mama's place? How do you, how? So, in other words, in Ntungamo we have two barracks. Isn't it, Gerard? There are two army garrisons. Now, let me mention that strategically you can say this is perfectly okay from a strategic perspective because we have had altercations with Rwanda. So if I'm justifying the garrisons, it's really about Rwanda. But for us, while on the political side, we also know that there is also the political dimension of these establishments. Yeah, and there are some minor details that we normally overlook, and yet they have implications on how we move forward into the future. So bottom line is that as a generation, ladies and gentlemen, we have to figure out how we can mobilize ourselves to talk to each other, not to vote against one another, because the voting against one another, it's not going to work. That's my reading of the situation. We have to find a mechanism to be able to talk to each other across the political spectrum. Talking to each other means that you even talk to people you don't like, that people that you think have no value. But I think that's the way we have to move forward. But that's the topic for another day. Once again, thanks very much, members, for listening to me. We are finalizing. This paper is going through peer review. So within less than a month, you'll have the full paper. But we said we need to start these pre-launch sessions, engage with the people, and make sure that some of your inputs actually help us to do the fine-tuning of the final messages. So thanks very much once again.
Another round of applause for Godber, for Mr. Job Kija, Banet Musasi, and Andrew Karamagi, and all of you, ladies and gentlemen, for having responded to the invitation to come and attend this meeting. And I think this brings us to the end of this morning's meeting. Maybe Mr. Kija, since you gave us the opening remarks, would you mind giving us the closing? Mr. Job Kija. Probably an opportunity also to say another word or two. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you so much, Patrick. I think let's clap for him. And of course, clap for the lead author, who is Godba, that we've been working with. He's done a very commendable job steering us. It hasn't been easy. Sometimes we wake up at 4 a.m. Yeah, and just really... We're also very complicated people. Of course, when you see some people, their heads are balding. It's not easy for someone to be 27 and you're balding like Andrew Karamagi. But yeah, so really in terms of going forward, this paper, we will still benefit from all the feedback that you've given us today. But also, if you have any feedback, we have shared hard copies. I don't know whether all of you have received, but in case you have it, we should be able to send it to you by WhatsApp and email, because we have your email addresses. We also have your mobile numbers, such that you can give us feedback on what so far you've heard and what you are seeing in that summary that we have shared so far. We should be able to make available the full paper once we are done with all this feedback that we are receiving, as well as the peer review of experts. Some of them, I've seen them in this room. And so probably in the next couple of weeks, we should be able to make it fully available. Once again, thank you so much for making time for this session. Some of you are invited on very short notice, but your insights have really been very useful to this session. And special thanks to our partners, Chapter 4, Civic Space TV, and others that have really been able to also make a contribution to this and make it happen. And of course, to you, the media, that have made it here and will be running stories on this session. We really want to thank you in advance. Otherwise, we want to wish you a very fruitful day for the remaining part of the work that you have today.